What's happening, people? Dom here from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So we're coming at you today with the second installment in a new series we're doing here on the channel called What's New with the 2. In these videos, we'll be overviewing the changes and updates that came to the second versions of things, not the first or the third, just gotta be the Mark II. And this one's kind of different, I guess, because for this piece of gear, I actually never even did a video on the original version of that thing. So I suppose this video will be like a decent overview of like both these guys here. Anyways, what is that super special second thing under the microscope today? The Panasonic LUMIX S5 II. So the LUMIX S5 and now the S5 II and S5 IIX, unfortunately not featured here today, are like the full frame but medium body sized cameras from LUMIX. And I say medium body sized cameras because I'm much more used to the larger bulky size of these LUMIX S1 line, the S1, S1H, and S1R. I just have more experience with these, and when I think of a full frame LUMIX camera, I'm thinking of it having like this heft to it, but not with these S5s. I've heard a lot about this original S5. I know that people have got to be excited about the S5 II, because what's there not to be excited about? We'll probably find out. So I'm excited, you should be excited too, and if you happen to want to show that excitement, you could just let off a little yelp wherever you are right now. Or if you're conscious of your surroundings for whatever reason, you could also show that excitement by hitting that subscribe button. Over 100,000 of you have already hit that subscribe button and let us know that you're interested in this content we roll out every week. So either that or you let off a loud yelp in place right now. So I'll let you choose there. But as for today, pretty much gonna go like this. I'm going to overview the changes that came to this S5 II coming from the Mark I, obviously. And we're gonna work our way from the outside in. We're gonna talk about the design and build choices that went into this. Then we're gonna transition into talking about some of the internal stuff, like what it's doing performance-wise in photo and video and a little bit of both. It's gonna be just thrilling. And then towards the end, we're gonna sort of wrap it up, talk about my final thoughts with this thing. Most importantly, discuss whether or not that upgrade is going to be worth it from the Mark I to the Mark II. So let's pop off. All right, so side by side, let's identify some of these body changes. Although honestly, I'll tell you right now, there aren't many physical differences going on from body to body here. Even with this Mark II being a hair larger in a few dimensions, it could still be hard to tell the difference between these two just looking at them. For example, one thing you wouldn't really be able to tell just by seeing it, this grip is much deeper and just gives me a more robust feel on this body. On the Mark I, gripping this, my thumb just kind of like rests in this little area right here. It seems a little prone to accidentally hitting some of these buttons or dials. On the S2, you just have a little bit more of a lip right there. And now I feel more tempted to sort of like rest my thumb on that little lip. It's a bit less out of the way. And also, I think the response on these dials and buttons are a little stiffer on this S5 II, which is also nice because I felt that response was a little loose on the original. So just picking up the camera for like 5 to 10 seconds right now, I'm already noticing some welcomed improvements to like handling. Oh, and honestly, I just noticed right now too that the strap hardware is different too, where the S5 II went for these like built-in loops rather than the sort of like triangle ring hardware. I probably should have led with this, but easily the biggest body difference is all of that venting that they introduced into the body of the S5 II. And they got creative with it too, I'll give them that. So on the Mark II, you'll notice that this EVF prism area is a lot chunkier, it's taller and it's longer. There's like this vent hidden underneath the lip of that viewfinder area. It kind of now hangs over the lens flange a little bit compared to the Mark I. And also, like even harder to see, they snuck two like neatly behind the left and right mode dials on the top there. And that little trick right there actually allowed LUMIX to get this thing to be able to record 4K 60p for an unlimited amount of time. So we're off to a good start. Moving on, another very welcomed upgrade. We finally have a full-sized HDMI here. So much better than the micro HDMI that was featured on the S5. So love that change. And that wouldn't really even matter so much if there weren't so many recording modes offered over HDMI, but there are. So just the fact that that's full-sized on the S5 II is just way better for any HDMI raw workflow you're doing with this thing. More points for the S5 II. Other than that, LUMIX says there are improvements made to both this 3-inch LCD and also the electronic viewfinder going on in here. That LCD screen does seem to be a lot more fluid on this guy, and that whole EVF area too on this camera is just like larger and it's a lot easier to find your eye. And that's basically it. There's some other small stuff. So where they made body and design improvements to the S5 II, I think they were totally needed, but they didn't like revamp the build of this camera. But that's fine anyways, because all the exciting stuff is going on the inside anyway. So now let's transition into talking about some of those internal changes going on here. Starting off with the biggest one, in my opinion, is autofocus. So this is a pretty big deal. The S5 II is introducing a phase detection autofocus system that's coming from the contrast-based method of the S5. This should help continuous autofocus in video quite a bit. That's also going to help you taking continuous burst photos. Should just be better overall. Probably a really needed change coming to the S5 II, because this original S5 autofocus just wasn't there, especially if you're used to a much more advanced system like Sony or Canon. And now actually I feel like I should mention this kind of like glazed over the sensor, because it's like a build and performance type thing. Both of these cameras are rocking what on paper looks to be the same sensor, but I've got to assume that there's some tweaks going on there. They're both 24.2 megapixel full frame CMOS sensors. They both have the same ISO values, same dual base ISOs, same shutter speed capabilities. A lot of things pointing to that they have the same exact sensor, but a couple things suggesting that they don't. It seems like a spruce up rather than like a whole entire new sensor build. Though, piggybacking off that ISO real quick, one very welcome change coming to the S5 II is you now have the ability to choose which base ISO you're working in, rather than the camera just intelligently switching for you. The bases in these cameras are 640 and 4000 ISO. If you were crossing over from like 32 to 4000, it would make that switch for you. I'm just in the mindset of just like the more like granular control you give me over the settings in my camera, the better. So I'm loving that on the S5 II. Another thing I noticed on the S5 II is this color shading compensation setting that is absent on the Mark I. So it looks like in this mode you can like add or subtract red or blue values from the image. That might be a great solution if you're framing up something that has like a lot of one color in it and you're worried about like getting some color spill. Though my first impression tells me that they should have added like green and magenta options to this setting too, if you're gonna do that, because that seems like the color adjustment that you'd make most often. So those were all the performance-based things that applied to both photo and video. Now we're gonna stay on the topic real quick of just the changes that came to the photo side of things. So in continuous photo burst shooting with the mechanical burst, the S5 II is giving an okay 9 frames per second compared to the S5 7 frames per second, though the raw buffer is much greater in the S5 II. And this next one, interestingly, is kind of like a give and take. So the original S5 actually has higher frames per second burst modes in the electronic shutter mode, though they are like tacked down in image size. But it does offer a 60 frames per second burst shooting that the S5 II doesn't. Though, remember the give and take, the 30 frames per second electronic burst mode on the S5 II, you can shoot RAWs in that where you couldn't do that on the original. And ending these photo notes on maybe kind of a bummer, but it seems some people are disappointed that the S5 II didn't make any improvements to the maximum shutter speed available in either electronic or mechanical modes. You're maxing out at 1/8000 shutter speed, which if I was like even this much more into photo, I would be upset about that. It just seems like a little out of place considering what this camera's competition is doing otherwise. So I would definitely consider that a drawback. They actually did increase the maximum shutter speed in video, which is like that just doesn't matter. So now saving the best for last here, because video is objectively better than photo. Video is going to be a big come up coming from body to body here. In short, basically everything that was going on the S5s is just getting like a facelift when it comes to the S5 II. Those 6K modes that were only available over HDMI on this guy are going to be offered internally on this thing. And the real big one to me here is those 4K 60 modes, which were only offered in 420 8-bit color sampling on the S5, are now offered in 10-bit 422 on the S5 II as well, which is really just needed. And also like the 200 is like the ceiling number for this S5 II apparently, because no video bitrate on this camera exceeds 200 megabytes per second. It's like 200 megabyte ceiling for bitrate in video and a 200 shot buffer in continuous shooting. It's like the ceiling is like 200. And so like no surprise, those new 5.9K and 6K modes are clocking in at that 8-bit 420 long GOP container. You're also gonna get some neat slow-mo options offered in the S5 II that you didn't get in the S5. Oddly, on both of these cameras, I don't love how you get to those. You actually have to be switched into the S&Q mode on the mode dial and then see what isn't grayed out, and that's going to be a high frame rate mode. So we're talking 1080 at 180, that's full HD, 180 frames per second. There's also 120 frames per second. I kind of would have liked to see a 4K 120 mode. That's kind of like the big, you know, slow-mo video stat of like these newer gen of cameras, and I would have liked to seen that in the S5 II. So just like in a nutshell, a lot more modes offered on the S5 II, things that were previously only done over HDMI on the Mark I. More importantly though, just that more robust sampling on those 4K 60 modes. And then also, I know I mentioned this earlier with the ventilation thing, you can also record those 4K modes for an unlimited amount of time just thanks to that added ventilation they gave this thing. So it's like good on them for bringing those things to this S5 II, but like maybe some of them are some things that should have been offered on the One anyways, so like how exciting is it? And then so for video stuff other than recording modes, just before we wrap up here, one small thing I noticed, you can now unassign the photo shutter button to do start or stop video recording, where on the S5 that's always tethered. Yep, see, exactly. No, don't. That's always tethered to video recording. I actually use a half press of the shutter button to like get out of menu pages all the time, and it's annoying when it just like starts recording a video clip when you do that. So overall, I think this Lumix S5 Mark II brought some welcomed changes coming from the S5, but again, it's like how great are those changes when they debatably should have been in the first one anyways? And I know these are meant to be on the more affordable side of mirrorless hybrid camera bodies right now, but keep in mind you're pledging allegiance to the L-mount alliance here if you get these, unless you plan on adapting lenses. But then you've got to think about your lens selection here. I haven't been nuts about these Lumix S lenses. Actually, this 70-200 f4 has been the one that's impressed me the most out of any of them, but they're just like okay. And you can give the camera body as much autofocus improvement as you want, but it still has to communicate and work fluidly with the lens that's going on there too. So not saying that was poor compatibility with these, but you got to understand that you're going up against some systems who have really strong and like reputable autofocus like reputation now, Canon and Sony. But they've got the Leica stamp of approval. So that's pretty much going to do it on this video, y'all. Let me know in the comments section if these changes brought to the S5 II are exciting to you, or if you were just like kind of underwhelmed by some of these changes. And also, let me know if I should bring that S5 IIX into the conversation. Truthfully, don't really even know much about what that thing is doing yet, so feel free to chime in and educate me in the comments section if you've got anything to say about that there, and we'll start a discussion. So as I told you in the beginning of this video, you can show that excitement by hitting that subscribe button. If you are already subscribed, you can hit that little bell button that pops up next to the subscribe button. Give that a little ring-a-ding-ding. That's going to keep you notified whenever we post new content, which is every week. So that's all I got for you people. Happy shooting, and we'll see you in the next one.